Okay. All right. Hello, everybody. This is Professor Kelly. Because people actually watched my first video, I was, one, very happy and excited to see that I'm not the only insane person that is obsessed with the Dabbleverse and cares about all this stuff. But secondly, because people did actually watch it, I wanted to do a follow-up to explain this chart I made, which I had in the background of my first video, but didn't really get into it that much because I was focusing so much on Aaron. So, like I said briefly in my original video, Greg Opie Hughes, Stuttering John Melendez, Aaron Imholt, also known as StutJo, and Chad Zumach, with a bunch of stupid nicknames that he made up for himself, so who cares? These four together are the Mount Rushmore of the Dabbleverse. If you're like me and you enjoy content from all four of these guys, you will never be starved for stuff. There's lesser characters like Joey C, Gino Bisconte, guy Stevie Lou, people that have gone, like my favorite Tony Michaels, Richard Ojeda. You remember that nut guy? That fucking nutcase. But this is your meat and potatoes. If you are interested in these four guys like me, you will always have something entertaining with the Dabverse to watch. Now, real quick, you might have noticed this on the last video, but I apologize. When I made my little heads, I could not find a recent photo of Opie. I think since he got fired from Sirius years ago, we've seen him and made fun of him on the internet with his homeless look and everything. But if you look on Google or anything, there's not any new photos of him. So this is like 20 years old. The rest of these are all within the last year or two, so these are pretty accurate of what these guys look like. This is way out of date, probably 20, 25 years. Anyway, with these four guys, there are a lot of similarities, which I touched on in my last video, and I'm going to go into greater detail. But if you like one of them, like for example, if you're really into Opie content, there's really no reason why you should enjoy John, Aaron, and Chad. There are some differences between these guys, but a lot of overlapping factors. Same thing, if you're really into Aaron, like I am, he is my favorite. John is the king of the Dabbleverse and will never be toppled, but Aaron is the most entertaining for me. But anyway, if you like Aaron, you should be entertained by John, Opie, and Chad. Real quick though, Chad is probably like the Ringo Starr of these four. If you had to cut somebody out, he's definitely the least talented, least entertaining. But, you know, 4 is a good number for everything. Nice round out. So I wanted to include him. Plus, I do find a lot of entertainment in making fun of Chad. Anyway, to get into the chart, starting out, I have Lazy. Now, you'll notice this is twice as big as everything else. That's because Lazy, if you analyze these gentlemen, is really the bedrock of all of their personalities. All four of these guys, to the best of my knowledge, have never had a real job. Now, I'm not saying you have to have a shitty job to, you know, be a functioning adult. But, again, none of these guys have ever had a job where they were really held responsible for anything, hard labor, things like that. In the case of Aaron, again, my favorite, seem to be bending over backwards, doing whatever they can to avoid ever having to have a real job. Now, second to that is untalented. It's kind of self-explanatory. None of these people are entertaining on their own. If you're like me, which if you're watching this you are, you can't get enough of these guys, but that's because of other people covering them and making fun of them. By themselves, all their shows are terrible. Nobody would watch StutJo just for StutJo, except for like the 20 rubes up in Minnesota. I don't know who watches Chad, unironically. John and Opie had some lingering fans from their, you know, legitimate fame they had, which I'll get to at the end. But that's so long ago, and how far they've fallen. I can't imagine anybody watches John or Opie now, remembering the Opie and Anthony show or the Howard Stern show, thinking of them in that light, sees them now and thinks, hey, these guys are still great. You know, the kids still got it. That makes no sense. Now, this one is important because how's a good way to word it? Opie's old partner, Anthony Cumia. I'm assuming you know who that is. Anthony is incredibly lazy, and he'll be the first one to tell you that. But I used to subscribe to Compound Media before it went under. And on that, Anthony never went a single month without taking days off. And he only worked 4 days a week, 2 hours a day. So he couldn't do 8 hours a week for a month without taking time off. Incredibly lazy. But the big difference between him and these guys is he has talent. Anthony Cumia probably has a lot of demons. There's a lot of stuff you could say you don't like about him. But he is talented. He's funny. He's likable. and he's able to get on camera by himself and talk for an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, and keep you entertained, keep your interest held. These guys could not do that to save their lives. Now, this is another big one. How they're perceived and what their public image is. Now, again, I mentioned this before, but this is where Chad breaks off a little bit. And on my first video, one guy did comment on this, sort of, and I want to explain this better, which is why I want to do this video. But what I mean by this is these three are absolutely terrified with how the public views them. The fact that we look at them as clowns and we laugh at them, they've got to be aware of it. Even with delusion like John and Aaron and stuff, they have to know they're the joke, and it drives them nuts. Chad breaks away from this because, again, if you follow all these people, you know that Chad has, on occasion, been the part of the joke. Chad has joined in with people, and you laugh, and you remember that Chad's a piece of shit, but in that moment, you're like, hey, he's part of the joke, make fun of Stuttering John. A good example is, this was a year or two ago, but the Shuley show with Shuley and his buddies, Bob Levy and all those guys. Well, Bob's gone now, but you know what I mean. This is a few years ago. They had Chad talking to John. He was on John's show, and they were sending Chad fake, like, Venmo donations, and Chad was showing them off to John just to drive John nuts, because John hates anybody successful, anybody else doing well. And, of course it was fake. Chad wasn't getting this money, but he was part of the joke. He was in on it. Another thing was back when he was on Kevin Brennan's show. Again, this is a while ago, but he was on with Bob Levy and Jim Florentine. And the three of those guys are just slam dunking on Chad the whole time, talking about how his mom's a whore and, funny jokes like that, how he's beaten as a kid. And Chad's there laughing along. He's being part of the joke. He was able to self-deprecate and get along. I'm going to talk about more of his breakaway that when I get down to, mentally ill, immaturity, because Chad, I'm borderline with him. I haven't got him marked as mentally ill, but there is evidence to support it. The biggest thing with him, though, is, again, from, like I said, being a former police officer and having to work with pieces of shit all the time, some other cops are pieces of shit, but the public, most of you are pieces of shit. You realize that there are a ton of people like Chad Zumach, Aaron Hemholt, John Melendez, and Greg Hughes out there. You would be shocked. If you're watching this and you had a normal childhood and you didn't have to deal with crazy stuff, you would be shocked just to realize, and like, if it was like that movie They Live and you could put the glasses on and see everybody for how they really are, to see how many just complete pieces of shit you interact with on a daily basis. Just for little things, like going into McDonald's to get a cup of coffee or something, or going to the bank or anything. If you had those glasses, you would see, hey, child molester, wife beater, drug dealer, just your common run-of-the-mill piece of shit like these guys. They are everywhere. So my point is, Chad is not uncommon with that, but the fact that he does not mind that he's perceived in a negative light, that lends me to believe that his stories about childhood abuse really are true. Now, he's a liar. Like, we'll get down, where is it? Here on the next one? Yeah, liar. Chad is definitely a liar, and he's the source for his childhood trauma, so he could be making all that up. I think it's real, though, because, again, having to unfortunately deal with kids who have been in abused situations, you find out that abused children or neglected children cannot differentiate between good attention or bad attention. Kids like that, which what I think Chad was, don't differentiate you praising them for getting A's on their report card or you scolding them for breaking a window or, killing the neighbor's dog or something insane like that. They're just happy that somebody's paying attention to them. And that's what it's like with Chad, where he could join in and be part of the joke, but then he's always got to fuck it up and be the outlier again. He doesn't care. There's something wrong with his brain where he cannot be part of something happy. People try to bring him in as part of the group, and he always fucks it up somehow. And I really think that goes back to childhood trauma. Again, I'll probably say this a few times. None of this excuses any of their behavior. I want to make it very clear that even though I do have some sympathy for Chad and even more for Opie, which I'll get into, all four of these are terrible people. I don't want to be friends with any of these guys. I don't want to hang out with them. I love watching them on the internet, but these kind of folks are who you want to avoid in real life. That being said, there are things that can explain why they are the way they are and help you kind of empathize with that person. And again, with Chad, I think he had legitimate trauma as a child, which leads to him being a piece of shit now. Doesn't excuse his behavior, but it helps you understand why he is the way he is. And that comes down here with liars. Now, again, I have Opie not marked as a liar, which on my first video, a few people commented on that, and I'll explain why I do not have him marked. All the others are clear. I don't think it really needs any explanation, as, John, of course, lies about everything. Aaron cannot help but lie. Chad is probably the biggest liar of all. Opie, I do not have listed as a liar because I have him listed as mentally ill. And you see he's the only one on here, although Chad, again, is borderline. But Opie is mentally ill, so because of that, I don't have him down as just a liar like these three. Now, that doesn't mean he doesn't lie. We all lie. I lie, you lie, everybody lies about some stuff. But Greg Opie Hughes, again, from my training and experience, this guy is really fucked up in the head. He's talked about how his grandmother and mother suffer from mental illness. Now, with mental illness, that can be treated with, drugs, therapy, having a support network, things like that, which he probably has access to. But the longer it goes untreated, the worse it is. And this guy is 62 or 63 now. So we're talking about decades of untreated mental illness, in my opinion, which has only made it worse and worse. But that's why I don't have him listed as a liar, because Opie, I think, really in his mind believes the stuff he says that we know is bullshit. A quick example. Back when I was young and I was looking to become a police officer, I applied to like 6 or 7 different departments, cast a wide net to increase chance of getting a job. And I don't know what it's like now. Back then, every department had me take a psychological test. Now, if you're sane, that's one of the easiest tests you'll ever take. It's insulting in some ways. But knowing people later on, like Opie, you realize why they have that. Because, for example, they'll ask you questions like, if you see people in a group and they're laughing, do you think they're laughing at you? Now, if you're saying, you're like, what? That's stupid. No, they're not laughing at me. I have no idea what they're talking about. But somebody like Opie, and probably these other guys, would think, yeah, they got to be laughing at me. I must be the joke. What are they talking about? Why are they laughing at me? Other things are questions like, if a friend or somebody is doing well, has some sort of success, do you secretly resent them and you're mad about their success? Again, a normal person's like, no, I'm happy my friend got a raise or whatever the case is. These guys, they hate that. And again, if you're saying, these questions are insulting to an extent, but that's really, again, it sounds stupid, but those filter out people like this from walking around with a gun and, the power to potentially ruin your life. It really does filter out a lot of just pieces of shit or insane people like Greg who have no business doing that job. Now, again, they're all lazy and don't want a real career, so I don't think they would ever have a job like that requires labor and, long hours and stuff like that. But I'm getting sidetracked. The point is, that's why I have Opie listed as mentally ill, but not a liar. If you disagree with that, please comment if you see this video and tell me your opinion. But from what I've seen, this guy really does suffer from mental illness. He's at his beach house, and I guarantee you he's having conversations with nobody. And then as time goes by, he remembers those as a real conversation where he's like, no, I talked to my neighbor Andy about it, and Andy said this and this. Whole thing is fake and made up, but in his mind, he thinks that's what happened. And I think that's the cause for a lot of his problems, where he perceives these things of people being against him, people saying things about him that he thinks are lies. A lot of it is, again, the guy's just fucking nuts, which is why I was saying before about the common factor. I might have skipped over this, actually. And if I did, I apologize, but I'm not going to do a take 2 on this. But I'll go back just in case I did. Common factor. Now, with all 4 of these guys, again, what's the common factor in all their failed relationships with friends, family members, co-workers, acquaintances? It's all them, and they never acknowledge that, hey, maybe, just maybe, I'm the problem. 20 people say I'm an ass. It's that old thing. If you run into a guy one day and he's a jerk about everything, you met an asshole. If everybody you meet is like that, you're the asshole. And that's these 4. And again, none of them can realize it. Chad, maybe to an extent, like I talked on before, but really they're oblivious to the fact that they're the common factor. Aaron, again, is the worst. And as you know, Mr. Toe, this homeboy, is my favorite. And he is probably the absolute worst on this because, again, he's the youngest guy. He grew up with the internet and things like that, so he should really have a better knowledge of what the world is like nowadays and how easy it is to track this kind of stuff, like lies, how other people are doing with their lives, like social media and stuff, to where you could see, oh, you know what? I thought Greg was a piece of shit, but I look now and I see he's the vice president of Google, so maybe he wasn't. Maybe it was me. That kind of thing. Now, narcissist, this is another one. I don't think it needs explanation for John and Aaron. You know, clearly they're both serious narcissists. Chad is not a narcissist because of what I said before. He doesn't mind being the butt of jokes, self-deprecating humor, being shit on. A narcissist would never allow that. And really, again, just look at either Aaron or John, and it's a perfect explanation of a classic narcissist, where they cannot allow any of their delusions to be challenged. Chad, you don't have that. Same thing with Opie. Now, he is very sensitive, again, on how he's perceived, but he's not a narcissist. And again, I think that's because of mental illness. He might exhibit some behavior that seems that way, but again, he's not like a narcissist. He's really just, a baby and probably mentally ill. To touch back on this with how they're perceived is a good example is just men overall are terrified of looking foolish. That's why most men say they don't dance when you go to a wedding or something like that. Like, nah, I don't dance. It's not that they don't dance or don't know how to dance. It's just they are petrified of looking silly and having somebody laugh at them. And that's a normal person. Take that, amplify it by 50 or 100, and you get these nut jobs. Now, hates women. Again, Opie is not a part of that. These three, I don't think really need any explanation. I mean, Chad, sending emails and voicemails and texts telling women to kill themselves for whatever they did to him. Clearly that's real misogyny. Which, by the way, if you say like, hey, I think a woman should go cook me dinner instead of working as a paramedic, that's not misogyny. Misogyny is a fear and or hatred of women. Okay? It's the same thing with racism. If you say black people like fried chicken and watermelon, that's not racist. That's just a joke of a stereotype. Real racism is like, hey, I don't want a black guy, living in my neighborhood or something like that. So my point about that is these people have real misogyny. They have real fear and hatred towards women. Chad, like I said, Aaron, come on, the guy's, how many restraining orders have women put out on him? He's facing his charges, which I'm very excited about. I don't want to get sidetracked, but we're a week away from his HRO things, which I don't want to focus too much on Aaron, but, there's a good chance if I was him, I would at least try to get them pushed back again. And that's not a good thing, but knowing him, I think he will try. And so, like, the worst thing they can do is say no. I hope it doesn't get pushed back because I really want to see that get resolved. But, Toe's thing is coming up next Friday. So at the time of filming this, less than a week away, we'll see what he does. I really don't put it past him to try. Will it be granted? I don't know. The court gives a lot of leeway, but it's already been 3 times as long as what their statutes say it's supposed to be to have one of those hearings set. So he's really pushing it. But again, it's Minnesota, and like I said before, judges can do whatever they want, and they're not held accountable to anything. Outside of something where, like, if you could prove a judge was taking a bribe or something like that, yeah, then they would get in trouble. But outside of that, they can make all kinds of just selfish, foolish, uninformed decisions, and if it's you involved in the case, you're like, hey, what the hell? This is my life. What are you doing? They could care less. They're thinking about what's for lunch. Again, it's not personal. They're just completely indifferent to your problems, even though you would think as the judge they should be really invested. But they're seeing pieces of shit like this all day, every day. So it does not take long to become burned out and jaded to where you just don't care. Even if it is an innocent person, with Patrick and Nick going with those HROs, regardless of what you think about those two guys, those restraining orders are complete bullshit, but judges don't care. So they'll get to it when they get to it, but hopefully that is this coming Friday. I'm very excited, but don't hold your breath on it getting pushed back or not. But back to hating women. John, look at the mental destruction he did to his oldest daughter. If that's not proof of his hatred of women, I don't know what else is. Aaron, like I said, with the HROs, those are all pretty straightforward. Chad, telling women to kill themselves. What do you have like that for Opie? You have when they were shot jocks, quote unquote, where he's trying to copy Howard Stern and he would be mean to women on the air. But what other examples are there? They have radio Opie, but that's it. Some people talk about how his family, like he might have murdered them or they might have left him. I don't believe any of that stuff. Opie doesn't bring up his family very often, and that's a good thing. Before all these shows would say, hey, we don't talk about Opie's family because he doesn't bring them up. But then now they're like, hey, he doesn't bring them up, so we're thinking maybe they're dead or they're gone. So it's like, he's fucked either way, But there's no evidence of him doing anything really poor towards women outside of his radio stuff. Now, there's some anecdotal stuff. If you really want to delve deep into the life of Greg Hughes, you could pull up some, tiny things of, I'm sure there's a disgruntled ex-girlfriend or something like that. But nothing to the extent of these three. And that's what I'm trying to get at. So clearly he stands out with those. Now, immaturity, I added fearful onto this. Now, these are two different things, but I ran out of space, so because they both are all four of them meet these categories, I just added it in. But what I mean by immaturity, again, it goes back to how they're perceived and their shitty attitudes. All these are very immature men. It doesn't really need a big explanation. Again, if you're partially familiar with any of these guys, you know exactly what I'm talking about. I added in fearful because coward seemed like too strong a word, but it goes back, like I said, to how they're perceived. All of these guys live in fear. And just to explain that a little better, I'm not talking about, you and your buddy are standing on a cliff over the ocean. You're like, hey, let's jump. It'll be fun. He's like, nah, I don't want to do that. We might get hurt or something. Like, come on, pussy. I'm not talking about that kind of fear. I'm talking about these four men constantly live in fear. They're always scared of what the internet is going to say. Somebody is going to personally attack them in an argument, not physically attack them. Although Chad, like you see with this thing, that whole fake catalytic converter thing, that was all bullshit. Nobody really beat him up. But my point is, he was saying somebody beat him up for his views. That doesn't happen in real life, but in their minds, all of these guys are thinking about that. And that obviously is a big factor in affecting the rest of their behavior, because they're just constantly living in fear of just the world. Again, of how people think of them, interactions that come up every day. I've never met John Melendez, but in a way, I'm partially responsible for this because I'm obsessed with the Dabbleverse. But how he is so paranoid of any interaction of like, hey, are you filming me? Are you a dabbler and you're only being nice to me in this bar because you want to, catch me in some kind of thing? He was, it's like putting stress on a building that never was up to code to begin with. Like it should have been condemned, but you have people living in it. And now you're putting extra weight up on the second story. That's like John. Like he was never a solid structure to begin with. And now it's, it's really looking bad for old Johnny. And real quick, I mentioned this before, but just while I'm thinking about it, John Melendez is the king of the Dabbleverse. I love all these guys. Aaron is my personal favorite, but John Melendez... Oh, you know what? John and Aaron, they both like to think of themselves as boxers. So perfect analogy is John is like young Mike Tyson. If you ever see Tyson's early fights, he is knocking dudes out well within the first round. A lot of times before even a minute is up. He was unstoppable. And that is like John in terms of being a piece of shit. He's not a fighter. Again, I don't want anybody confused this, especially Aaron. He'll twist that and say, hey, some guy on the internet was saying I'm a great boxer. I'm the only one that could challenge Tyson. But no, I'm saying they're pieces of shit. So in terms of being a horrible human being, John is young Mike Tyson, where he's unstoppable, unbeatable. Aaron, though, is like the only guy who would be able to go 3 or 4 rounds before getting knocked out by John. John would knock out Chad and Opie in the first round. Again, not actual fighting, being a piece of shit. Aaron would be able to go a respectable amount. If there was a hypothetical fight between these two, John would be the favorite, but Aaron would be a worthy challenger. Again, in terms of being a piece of shit. Now, mentally ill, I already covered that with Opie. Clearly, he is mentally ill. When you're a police officer, you're forced to deal with people that society has kind of forgotten about, thrown away. A lot of times it's because of that person's own actions, why they don't have any friends or family to go to, and they're just out there on the streets. But cops have to deal with this. Paramedics and firemen do too, but police more than anybody. Just complete pieces of shit who are pieces of shit for a variety of reasons, but a lot of times they're legitimately crazy. So what I'm saying is I've met a lot of nut jobs in my life, and Opie, he's given off a lot of these same red flags where you're like, clearly this dude is not well. And at his age, there's not really any point to trying to get him treatment. It's kind of like a smoker that stops after 30 years. What's the point? Your lungs are fucked up. Enjoy those Marlboro Lights while you can. It's the same thing with Greg. Now again, I don't think his family has left him. What I think, also that's easy to, I'm sorry, I'm all over the place, but that's easy to verify. Divorces are public record. If his wife had divorced him, we would know that. Like how they found John's high school transcripts, you can find Opie's divorce records if they existed. His wife and kids are fine. They probably, if I had to guess, spend more of their time in their Philadelphia house because New York is such a shithole. Philadelphia's a shithole too, but, I'm no fan of the North. You might have noticed I have a bit of an accent. Oh, coincidentally, all 4 of these guys are Yankees. That could be the reason why they're so fucked up. But if you had to choose between Philly and New York, Philadelphia is a much better place to live. Not a good place, but if you've been to both cities, I'm taking Philly all day long. So his family might have dipped out, and they're in the Philadelphia house just because it's a slightly better place to live, slightly safer. But who knows? Now, stupid, I talked about this a little bit in the last video. John and Chad are clearly learning disabled, slow adults. John, again, we saw his transcript. We know he was a below average student. Went to some shitty community college because he did not have the grades to go straight to college. Not to sound like a snob or anything, but I don't know what it's like now. But before, at least, when you graduated high school, you would have what's called a college-ready diploma, which means in high school you took whatever classes were required to just go off to university. If you didn't, you could go to, or if you want to save money, but if you didn't have the grades or the required classes, you would go to community college for a little bit, which is what John did. Then he went to NYU and famously did not graduate. Again, to Opie's credit, out of these four, Opie and Chad are actual college graduates, but Opie went to college with a plan in mind. He went to do broadcasting, some shitty college in upstate New York. I think it's called Geneseo. But he graduated and then got a job in the field he was pursuing and what he studied for, which is what college is supposed to be about. Chad went to, I think it was Kent State. I could be wrong, but somewhere in Ohio, and got a general studies degree, which is like, why did you fucking waste your time and money getting that? That's a worthless degree. That's just, other than just to say, hey, I've got a college degree, that doesn't help you with anything. Aaron went to some 2-year broadcasting school, which, to his credit, is helpful for the radio. But it was some 2-year school. I looked it up. It was called Brown Institute or Brown University, and it's defunct. It doesn't exist anymore. And then John, of course, went to NYU. One, did not graduate, but was studying film to get what's called a fine arts degree. You can get a Bachelor of Science, which is like engineering, mathematics. Bachelor of the Arts, which could be a variety of things. That could be a history degree, a political science degree. Then you get Bachelor of Fine Arts, which is what John did not get, but was pursuing. And but then that's just a bullshit degree. Again, that's just some paper saying, hey, I went to college, but what employer's like, oh, you studied puppetry? Great, you're qualified to fucking run this hydroelectric dam. Get out of here with that. So I'm sorry, I got a little sidetracked. My point is, John and Chad are clearly learning disabled and stupid. I talked about Aaron before. He is a normal intelligence. He's just evil, very immature, very spiteful, vengeful, and does all kinds of terrible things, which cloud his judgment, which, if you're just looking casually, would make you think he's stupid. But then when you look at it in greater depth, again, if you're an insane person like me and you're obsessed with the Dabbleverse and study all this, you can see he is of normal intelligence. He just chooses to do really shitty things, which, again, goes back to being a narcissist and shows that he is not mentally ill because he is making these conscious decisions to do bad things. Opie, again, mentally ill, but is not stupid. Mental illness can affect people at different times in their lives. We're all susceptible to it depending on different factors, family history, your environment, things like that. With Opie, again, with his mom and his grandma, we know he has a history of it. But without that, he's not a smart guy, but he's definitely not stupid. And then again, with success, down here at the bottom, I threw this in. You might have noticed I have the most sympathy for Opie out of the four of these. Real quick, obviously, if any of us had to be put into one of their bodies and live their lives, my thing's upside down. If any of us had to be one of these guys, even with mental illness, 99 out of 100, everybody's taking Opie. As far as we know, he is happily married, to what I'm assuming is an attractive woman, has kids. Kids are not mentally ill as far as we know, and he still has money. Some people talk about Opie being broke. Real quick, I don't think that's true because, again, he's in his early 60s, so he's old enough to withdraw all the investments that he and Anthony's manager had them do with their money without penalties. And he could take early Social Security by now if he wanted, paying all that shitload of New York taxes and federal taxes and everything. He and Anthony should get very healthy Social Security checks. And if he waits longer, he'll get more, but he's old enough to get it at the earliest age. I think you can withdraw at 62 unless they raised it. But my point is, he's clearly the most successful, everybody. John had big success, again, outside of the Dabbleverse. Pretend the Dabbleverse doesn't exist. There's no Who Are These Podcasts or anything else. We would all know who Greg Hughes and John Melendez are. They all had real success in the real world of show business. John, nothing like Opie and Anthony's success, but he did have legitimate success. Now, again, keep in mind, you have to be objective. Forget about how much we hate John and what a piece of shit he is. Was it earned? No. Did he do it off of merit, hard work, anything like that? No, it was really luck, his stutter, right place, right time. But that doesn't matter in terms of was he successful or not. If you started a business were doing 60 hours a week, worked your ass off, became a millionaire. I go to a gas station, buy a scratch-off ticket, and win, and now I'm a millionaire. Of course, I did not earn it like you did, but we're both millionaires. We're both, living in the same neighborhood. We got boats and everything. We're having a good time. That's John versus Opie. Again, Opie is very lazy now. He did not become successful due to super hard work, but to his credit, it was earned in a legitimate way, where he met Anthony Cumia, recognized that talent, said, hey, I can do something with this, and of course their show is wildly successful. John squandered everything he had, being as stupid as he is, as lazy as he is, and the common factor of destroying every relationship, he has nothing. So now he's down here with Chad and Aaron, which in some ways is worse. I think it was Dante. There's a book I read in high school, but there was a passage, I remember it was something, and I'm sorry I'm butchering it, but it was something about just how there is no worse feeling, like there's nothing shittier than when you're down low, but you had tasted like the highs and of success and happiness because you know what that is like and you experienced it, and now it's gone. And it's much worse than being somebody like these guys that have never had any real success. I think that's it with these guys. I'm going to watch this before I post it to make sure it makes sense. If not, I'll redo it, or I might just be too lazy and just post it as is. Who knows? Because again, I'm not making a YouTube channel. You don't need to subscribe. If you do watch this, hit the like button so I know somebody's watching it. Feel free to comment, and we can further discuss this. Or you should make a video, and I'll watch it if I can find it through the YouTube algorithm. But like I said, I'm obsessed with all of this stuff. I watch everything I can find on these four guys. It's wildly entertaining. Aaron, again, he is my favorite. You might not care, but the reason why I love Aaron so much over these guys is because we're the same age. I know Aaron's birthday because of his arrests. I'm just a few months older than him, and I find it fascinating to see what somebody the same age as me is doing in their life, where it's wildly different than mine, where it's like, oh my God, this could be me if I just was stupid and making all these wrong decisions, where I lost my family, I lost my job, I'm poor. Scares the hell out of me, but at the same time, I can't look away. So when I look at Aaron, it's kind of like a bizarro Superman version of myself, where it's like, this is me if I was ugly and, fucked up my marriage and fucking up my kids and all this other kind of stuff. And I cannot get enough of it. So that's why I love Toe more than anybody else. Aaron, if you're watching, yeah, I'm a big fan. I am obsessed with you. Not seething, which by the way, that's something that these people all get wrong. Seething is when you're angry, but it's unexpressed anger. It's when it's like boiling inside you, but people on the outside don't know that you're all that angry. So when he talks about people seething, he's just being an idiot. Because if they're openly disliking you and yelling or anything, which all that stuff is bullshit, what he talks about, but that would not be seething. Seething would be if he did not notice their animosity towards him. But anyway, I'll end this video. I have no idea how long it's gone. Hopefully it's not too long. And really excited for Aaron's court date next week. Hopefully it does happen. I forgot to mention them before when I was talking about all the Dabbleverse shows, but there's one, it's a smaller channel, but it's called Pretty Antisocial, and it's these there's a sexy redhead and her friend, and they cover Dabbleverse stuff. I wish they got into John and Opie. They don't cover him, but they love talking about Aaron, and it's fantastic because they do good coverage, but it's extra good because it's two women slam dunking on this guy. Excuse me. And like I said, his true misogyny just makes it even better because he watches everything that these shows do. He's watching this. But he's watching their show, and it's got to drive him nuts to see two women shitting on him and making good points. But anyway, really excited to see what happens with that. I probably won't make another video, but if Aaron's court comes around and he does go to jail, I might make something short just to talk about that more because, again, paper law and trial law, like how it is actually executed, are so much different. And that's something that people that were not in the criminal justice system do not understand. All kinds of things can be illegal on paper. And people can charge you with all kinds of things. That doesn't mean shit. All that matters is when you are in front of that judge and what he or she says at the time of sentencing. That's the only time anything is actually going to apply. And I don't know if I mentioned this before or not, but when they sentence you, a lot of time, it's not even that. If they say life in prison, life does not mean life unless it's explicitly stated without the possibility of parole. If somebody gives you life in prison and that's not added, you could get out in 7 years. I've seen it. I've seen people get life in prison and they're out in less than a decade walking the streets again, because that's just how fucked up our justice system is. But I could rant about that forever. I won't. But my point is, with Aaron, I do believe Towboy is going to jail for at least 30 days, maybe longer. I would love longer. But we just have no way of knowing. Right now, we're waiting on his HRO hearings. Hopefully, those happen. But the big show, though, is early, I think it's October 2nd, and we will see what happens with that. If it's a happy ending, I might do a video just to recap the trial or something like that, although I'm sure tons of shows are going to be doing that, so maybe I won't. But this video is just to explain my chart, all the similarities of these gentlemen, why some of them do not fit categories of the others, but really there's so much overlapping that if you enjoy Opie content, you should love the three of these guys. If you love John, you should love the other three. If you love Aaron, the other three. If you love Chad, you definitely like these, because again, he's the least entertaining of all of them. But I mean, there's so much to go around. One last thing is Gino Bisconte. I really wish that guy got more hatred on the internet. He is so annoying. You know, so make a video making fun of Gino, and I will watch it and give it the thumbs up and subscribe to you. But he needs more hate. He doesn't get it. I mention him though because he could be the. I keep tapping this, but he could be the big factor that is what causes old Toe to go to jail. We shall see though. But that's everything. Again, please like, comment. You don't need to subscribe, but engage in the conversation because I love talking about this shit. Tell me what you think, and we'll see what happens.